When you have a loved one with dementia, my mom has Alzheimer's. One of the hardest things I think is the fact that you have to learn a new way to communicate. And it's
Mhm.
not like they can't talk anymore. It's just hard because they don't remember things. And you don't want to egg them on and say, hey, mom, remember this,
Mhm.
remember that. So
It's really
it can be
hard.
tough, but it can be done.
It can be really challenging. So today we are bringing in Carolyn Rector. She is a longtime speech therapist and works a lot with the older population, with our parents.
Mhm.
Carolyn, thanks so much for being with us. I think let's just start with beginning stages of dementia, where you might have somebody who maybe they kind of are recognizing that they're not remembering. They may not want to admit that they don't remember. So there might be anger or blame, or just they don't want to talk about it. So how do you communicate best when when we know that they don't know, or they're remembering that? Do we acknowledge that? Do we point that out?
Hi. Well, thank you, first of all, for having me. The best thing to do is redirect. When someone with dementia is feeling frustrated and you can see they're kind of trying to compensate for their memory loss, the best thing to do is either redirect or set up routine for them. People with dementia tend to do best with really structured routines. Routine can actually substitute for memory loss for quite some time. And so that can mean, putting their shirt and pants that they're going to wear for the next day in the same place in their room every day, or making sure that they're sitting at the same place in the dining room every meal. Just little things like that can really help compensate for memory loss.
Does it sometimes also though keep our loved ones, maybe our siblings that haven't seen our parent for a while, think, "Oh, mom's doing okay," because she's still able to do those things that she's been doing, because those are more routine or sort of built into your brain rather than new problem solving?
Absolutely. So commonly, I've seen patients who maybe will fall at home, break their hip, and then they are admitted to the hospital and then maybe a skilled nursing facility for rehab. And someone who maybe hasn't been with them or know that they have had these cognitive deficits start coming up and getting worse and worse, the deficits progress. Yes, they are taken into a new environment, and so those cognitive deficits and memory loss can really come into to the forefront because people aren't because their routine is absent. Yes, absolutely.
Mhm.
Yeah, and to me, one of the hardest things to get away from is correcting them. When my mom would say something over and over, instead of saying, "Mom, you just said that,"
Mhm.
or if she forgot something, "Mom, remember this," you just have to let it go.
You do just have to let it go because, and that may sound frustrating to some, that may sound as if it might be the opposite
Mhm.
suggestion that you should actually lean into, but really you shouldn't correct a patient with dementia. You should
Mhm.
really try to, like, again, redirection, like, well, my son, I can't find my car. Where did it go? And well, maybe your son took it to get the oil changed.
Mhm.
Or let's go get some ice cream and play dominoes. That sounds like a better idea. Just redirecting them away from the topic they keep bringing up. So commonly, especially patients with dementia, they may be looking for their parents. Well,
Mhm.
obviously, their parents maybe passed away 30 years ago, but if you remind them that their parents are gone, they're actually going to relive that grief in the
Mhm.
moment. And so that can be really detrimental to them.
Mhm. So that I think is such a hard thing, especially when when you're saying something that you know is not true, and having to sort of take the understanding for ourselves that it feels weird to be knowingly telling your parent something that is not true, but knowing that that is going to make things easier for them at the same time.
Yes, we refer to that in the therapeutic world as therapeutic fibbing. At least I coined that term, which, you don't want to lie. Obviously, that's never a good practice. But sometimes, again, it's not lying, it's redirection.
Mhm.
Mm.
If someone is searching for their puppy that maybe has been gone 50 years ago, kind of be like, let's go look for the puppy later, but let's go play a game of cards. We haven't played that game for quite some time. Let's play. And just redirecting them, and kind of they'll forget about that moment, that instance that is frustrating them, and going into something that really becomes more of a positive experience instead.
Mhm.
Yeah, therapeutic fibbing has been very valuable with us dealing with my mom. The other thing though that has been easy to do, or easier to do than I thought it would, is to let her control the conversation. Because as her Alzheimer's has gotten worse and worse and worse, I'll visit her and I'll say, "Oh, and Mom, your granddaughter Taylor has moved to New York City," and she'll say a sentence, and then all of a sudden she starts talking about when she was little, and her older sister and her younger brother, and about her mom and her dad, and that's basically all that she really remembers now. But it lets her control the conversation. I just have to kind of sit back and let her finish whatever her thought is, and then say something else.
And that's a great strategy. That is a great strategy. So the area of our brain that controls long-term memory research has shown that it actually, long-term memory stays intact longer than short-term memory for patients with dementia. So something you can do, though, that I find is really beneficial for my patients is that when I make them a memory book. I had a patient way back when. She used to be a nurse. Her family had a yacht. They lived in California. So her family brought in all of these photos, and then we put them in a collection in a book. And she was able to relive these stories and these memories. And she would just talk, and just language would just flow because she was reliving all these wonderful memories with her kids and then her grandkids. And so creating a memory book is a really useful tool for family members and caregivers to really stimulate that language and create positive interactions.
Yeah.
I know that Mike's dad uses that as a diversion technique as well, because he'll show pictures and that'll start a different conversation and that kind of thing. What about when the parent or the person with dementia really can't carry on a conversation very well? You ask them questions, and not necessarily about something that just happened, but even bringing up, "Oh, so tell me about, when you were in grade school or when you were in high school or something a long time ago." What do you do if they just really just give you a one word answer, and then it's really hard to, you feel like you want to have that good conversation, but it's sometimes hard to have that.
Great question. Yes. So you have to kind of break down language. As people with dementia age, their brains change. So you kind of think of them as, when we were younger, 18-month-old, 2-year-old children, they're speaking in, 1 to 2 word sentences, or maybe giving them a choice. So for instance, I might ask, instead of saying, "What would you like for lunch?" I would say, give them a choice. Would you like a cheeseburger, or would you like a grilled cheese sandwich, for example? So giving them that power still to make the decision, because people with dementia, they do feel that loss of empowerment. So much of their choices, everyday life choices, have been taken away from them by this awful, awful disease. And just giving them any kind of power, when they're getting dressed in the morning, do you want to wear your blue shirt or your green shirt? Just simple choices can really give them a lot of freedom within their environment.
Yeah, it's been very interesting to me to see my mom, besides the fact that she forgets names and faces, but she forgets words. And we have to not get upset about that and just kind of help her with that when she doesn't remember a word.
Exactly. And just remembering to be patient, answering yes, no questions, using multi-modes of communication. When she's having trouble with word, again, give her real objects. Do you want a banana or an apple? Show her the actual objects, or even photos of objects can be really helpful. When you give a direction, don't just say, "Put your shirt on." Actually hold up the shirt and physically give the patient the shirt, and, kind of give gestures along with your words. And that can give multi-modes of communication can really help patients with dementia not only understand your language, but be able to communicate expressively more effectively as well.
I think one thing that's been challenging for me is that I totally can appreciate the fact that it's sort of like being with a toddler, and thinking of the ways when my kids were little of how you teach them and they learn. But I guess the biggest difference is that with your child, they're going to learn what the shirt means, and they won't need you to do those promptings anymore. And yet the challenge, I think, and maybe it's just sort of emotional too, as the adult child, watching your parent reverting back to in some ways, treating them like a toddler, but knowing that they can't necessarily learn what we're trying to teach them. Because I think a lot of times what we find is that it's natural for us to want to help them. Like, well, here I can teach them what this is again, and knowing that may not really be possible with somebody with dementia.
This is very true. And that is really hard. I have always tell my family members that I have worked with my patients with dementia that this progressive disease dementia is harder on you as family members than it is on the patient. The
Mhm.
patient doesn't realize that they're not able, they may be thinking they're telling you what they want, and they don't realize that their language isn't quite intact anymore.
Mm.
And so it really is harder on the family members than the patients with dementia. Absolutely. And so, just continuing to stay patient and provide, as I said, multiple modes of communication, just trying different strategies. A strategy that maybe worked last week might not work this week because of the progression of the disease. So staying flexible with your family member and just offering different strategies every time you interact.
And do you find that when somebody is sort of at the beginning stages of dementia, I mean, I guess one of the things is it'd be so interesting to know what they know, because and I guess it's hard they can't necessarily articulate that, but do we have an idea of how much they might or might not remember even kind of at that beginning of the stages, and which probably brings out that frustration?
Yes, absolutely. So as when I am evaluating a patient initially, I meet them for the first time. One of the first things I do, not only do I do standardized assessment, and I also call the family members and I chat with them. Tell me about where they were born. Tell me about where they grew up, their brothers and sisters, what they did for a living. What were some of their hobbies? Just kind of get to know them as a person, because bringing in that information into a session, I'm not going to teach someone to do woodworking if they've never done woodworking before. But maybe I have a gentleman that was his hobby. He loved building birdhouses. So, we build a birdhouse. And from that activity, we can get so much language out, so much stimulation. So really taking the time and doing a deep dive into, who is this person? Who was this person prior to the onset of their dementia? And then as family members thinking about this, like, Dad really loved that card game. We haven't played that in a long time, but I wonder if he still remembers it. I'll tell you, dominoes is one thing. Once you learn how to play dominoes, people can play dominoes. I mean, it's amazing. It is amazing.
Yeah.
Don't underestimate some of those skills that maybe they developed as kids that they still have and still love to do. Yeah.
I like to say that sometimes when my mom hits the cheese, instead of finding a hole, she hits the cheese because she's able to remember something. Sometimes it surprises me. I walked out with her when I visited her a couple of weeks ago, and as I walked out, she said, if you have to be in a place like this is a good place to be. I was like, where did that come from? So sometimes, besides having the patience, you can't really show surprise. Like, wow, I'm glad you remember something, Mom.
Right.
Again, you have to show them grace.
Yeah, and just roll with it. And there are those times of clarity. There are those moments where it's like, okay, I know that I fell and I broke my hip and that I'm here, but this is a nice place and I'm happy. That's wonderful. She communicated to you that, like, I like living here and this is okay. So that had to give you some peace of mind.
Yes,
that she was happy and feels good about the decision.
Yeah. So any final words, just as far as the ways as adult children that we can best support our family members with dementia?
I mean, I think just be patient and offering grace. It's a difficult process. It's a difficult process to watch as a loved one. I've had grandparents who've had dementia. I've had other loved ones have dementia. It's hard because sometimes their personality changes as well. But just, really reintroducing those memories and remembering who they are on the inside as a person, because that doesn't change. Their inside, their heart isn't changing just because of this disease that is affecting their brain and their ability to communicate. That doesn't affect who they are as a person. So just really remembering who they are and why you love them, and just continuing loving them regardless of the disease process.
So if they say the sky is orange, you say it's a beautiful shade of orange.
Yes. Let's get some ice cream.
Okay. There you go. Carolyn, thanks so much. Some great tips. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, guys. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I think what we learned there, and what we talk about all the time, is that you can't take it personally, because it's not them talking. Many times it's the disease, and to have, show that grace.
And I think for us, just knowing what are the tools and what are the ways that I can communicate that will make me feel good, but also know that it's going to benefit them as well.
Yeah, it's something to learn. Hey, if you have any topics you'd like us to discuss, let us know. Parenting aging parents.